Yes. Alright, yes. Mic check one, two, mic check one, two. Okay, hopefully that worked. I think I muted. Hold on. Okay, yeah. I muted the mic and totally forgot that I muted the mic. So you guys gonna have to excuse me on that one. Yeah, okay. All right, so let me just trying to monitor the live feed. Um, so anyhow, right? Continuation off of yesterday's video, the discussion on are we uh, at fault because of our own ignorance? And I say no, given the mountain of evidence that shows that white racism and this white racist system has engaged in destructive warfare against black people in this country. And it continues. One of the things that have led to particularly black Americans is in their the destruction of their mindset is environmental warfare, environmental poisoning, but not just their mindset, not just their neurological state, but also biological as well. A lot of these policies that negatively affect black people in this country, particularly black Americans of ADOS, who are the descendants of slavery, here, the descendants of enslaved people, I should say. Um, something that we hear about, from time to time, we'll see uh, on social media, particularly black social media um, channels such as the Roland Martin Show, where we bring up these discussions from time to time. But the vast majority of black people on social media, particularly black Americans, fail to understand the significance. And this is from what I see, okay? Particularly when you have uh, a small group of black people, male and female, okay, who have been somewhat, successful, all right, other than playing in sports or starring in movies and stuff like that, but in the business world, right, and other uh, industries, the tech industry, what have you. And it always troubles me when I hear them speak, because they're like, well, I made it. I teach other young brothers and sisters to do it. Um, but again, how many of us, right, black people, how many of us, compared to our overall population, right, are what we would call living the middle class lifestyle, the upper middle class lifestyle, the millionaire class lifestyle, right? How many? So I would ask you to go and look at the statistics, right, and compare that to the overall number of black people here in the United States. Okay, and when I say black people, it doesn't matter if you were born here, if you immigrated here, but just understand the overall. Just know that the overall picture that and it's going to paint a very grim picture. All right. Then go and compare the population of white people and the number of white people who are in the middle class, the upper middle class, the millionaire class, right? And then compare that to their overall population number here in the United States. And that will give you a clear picture, right, of the status in which black people, economic status in which black people are in this country, right? And, but we tend to want to fool ourselves because we've ascended to, and I don't even want to say the word ascended because again, that's the religious thing. And, particularly when you have these religious, you know, I will call them Negropeans, because they always think that God put them in those positions, right? You know what I'm saying? They always think because they may get a nice job or what have you. You know, even if they work their ass off, they hustle and bustle, right? Some will make it, others will not. And I always say this, for those of us who are fortunate, understand that you are fortunate. It isn't some act of God. Understand that who controls this society, right? We know who. We see our black millionaire class do absolutely nothing. The little bit that they do, they think that they're doing a lot. Compared to, you look at the overall population between of white people, what it is that they're doing, their social responsibility to their group, right? You look at the Asians, their social responsibility to their group, what it is they do, right? I mean, you can take a walk down in Manhattan. You go to Chinatown, right? You will see Chinese owned banks. You will see Chinese owned restaurants. And I'm not talking about your mom and pop restaurants. I'm talking about some of the most uh, upscale restaurant, and not just in Chinatown. You go to Little Italy, same thing, right? Then you go into the business world, into the financial world, and you see who the majority of people who are running these finance corporations, right? Yet, and then real estate. And I always say this, why doesn't these wealthy black people buy real estate? Real estate is how you build generational wealth, not just for yourself and your family and your kids, right? But if you have an idea of what social responsibility is to your people and you engage in that social responsibility, you help to uplift your people economically, right? I talked about how, with particularly in black communities, particularly here in like New York, Chicago, LA, what have you, where you have people who are renting houses or renting apartments, but the owners of these houses and apartments, the vast majority are white. And a vast majority of those apartment buildings, okay, if they're not renovated due to gentrification, you will find within those apartment buildings or within those houses, okay, lead has been painted over and over again. And despite what the government say, or these agencies that are in charge of public housing or in charge of housing safety, we know that within our community that we live in, right, that they ignore a lot of the environmental factors that harm us as black people and harm us as we were kids and our kids today. So when we on social media, the few, and there's very few black people, particularly black Americans or black people living in America and today on social media um, who are actually speaking about this, right? Because because they're successful, they tend to have this grandiose mindset, right, of what success is. They make themselves out to be more successful than they are. Okay, and this is that hyper individualistic, egotistical mindset that have been ingrained in our minds today. And it's not just people born here, people who immigrated here from the Caribbean, from Africa, from even black people from Asia. Talk about Indians. Okay, so you have very very dark Indians, darker than me. Okay, who don't even think that they're black people, right? Even though throughout their history, before the invasion of um, the Germanic people, um, India was called East Ethiopia, right? And the vast majority of people in India are black people. Okay, it doesn't matter if they have straight hair, thin nose, thin lips, they're still black. Again, black people have various phenotypes. There isn't just one phenotype in which white supremacy have taught us uh, what a black person or a Negro or what we will call Negroid is, right? So anyway, so these black people on social media, again, they always they it's like they don't even this right here is not a thing that they don't even want to speak about because they don't know, right? Their minds have been blocked. And again, this is the social conditioning of our people, particularly again when you look at, and we know this, when you look at social media, um, black people who tend to talk about, oh, there is no racism and everybody's on equal footing, those are the ones that tend to have large subscribers, right? And particularly within the white population, they will subscribe to those types of black people because that's the ones they want, right? That's the one they want to put out there, right? Those black people who are going to ignore the facts, ignore the reality, right? Because they are now in a different socioeconomic bracket, and so they think that their money somehow is equates them to that of white people, which we know it doesn't, right? We know it doesn't. So they don't talk about these things. So they get on social media and act like if these things don't affect us, right? That these things are not part of our lives, we're not part of our life, and are not part of our children's lives today. When the vast majority of black people live in poverty, right? And when I say poverty, I'm talking about including the working class black people, which is the vast majority of people, right? The working class, then you have the working poor, and then you have the poor. So the working class, I put them under the poverty level, right? Just as the working poor and the poor. Okay, and then we also know that middle class blacks, particularly um, when they have a family, as their parents get older, they die off, they pass on whatever little wealth they have accumulated, particularly the house, right? We know that the vast majority of their children go right back into poverty. Okay, because we know that they don't hold on to the houses; they sell them. They sell them for whatever and these white developers come in, lowball them, and they sell it, right? Renovate it and sell that house for two to two and a half, three times the price of what they paid us. Okay, so again, this stuff affects us, and like I said, I've for the past decade and a half researching this stuff. A whole bunch of topics that affect us that we tend to ignore. We just don't want to believe. And a big part of that is because the vast majority of us are religious. So we're always waiting on God. We always, we're in church every Sunday, praying and kikiing it up, right? Meanwhile, we go back to homes that in communities that is poisonous to us and to our children. All right. And again, when I talk about who's to blame for our ignorance, like I said, I don't blame black people. Period. I don't, people may say, well, at some point you got to take responsibility. Well, let me ask you a question. If you were poisoned as a child, just as those children in Flint and all across America, all right, those black children, right, as well as adults, and we know what lead does to our minds, particularly our neurological uh, functioning minds and uh, even our psyche, right? Am I going to hold these people responsible? Or are you going to hold these people responsible? Or are you going to hold the people that poison them responsible? But we don't even want to do that, right? Because we see, right, there's been no government official in Flint or anywhere else in the United States that has purposely, and intentionally poisoned us as a people. And the biggest reason why they do this is because they don't want us to compete with them, not intellectually, not economically. So when Dr. Umar Johnson talks about kids being diagnosed with ADHD, because again, attention deficit disorder, and there's definitely a link between kids that have been poisoned with lead and being diagnosed with ADHD. Okay, and again, this is not uh, coincidental, and I want us to think about these things as being purposeful, right? Intentful. Okay, this is violence committed, another form of violence that have been committed against us as a people, right? But we don't want to think of it as in that term as violence committed against us. Gentrification is another form of violence committed against black people because it displaced us. So here's a group of people who ran away because they didn't want to live with black people. Now, decades later, after they've, uh, um, sufficiently uh, poisoned us, sufficiently send uh, uh, a large number of us, particularly black men, in prison. Um, we see now they're moving back, right? And they've been moving back for what, for the past decade and a half, right? But no one ever asks and say why. And like I always say, all you got, if you're a black person, just think, if you live in a neighborhood that was gentrified within the past 2 decades, what is the first thing that you see them do? You will see them digging up the streets and changing the water pipes. And that should be your first clue, because if the water was safe in our neighborhood, why change the pipes? Right? But that's the first thing that they do. When landlords are renovating buildings, they're tearing down the walls and stuff like that. They're doing this when you're in the house, right? And we know that within the community that we live in, particularly where you find a large population of black people, that the housing in those areas are, uh, particularly the way how they're built with toxic materials, or materials that contain toxic chemicals. Okay, and a big part of it is because these things are within the policies, right? Policy within the federal government, right? That has created the condition in which um, our, you know, I'm not speaking about my parents or grandparents, but I say our because, I consider myself as, put it like this, I see myself in every black person, man, woman, or child that I encounter with. Okay, I don't separate myself from any other black person, whether it be in the United States, be in the Caribbean, whether it be in Africa or Europe. Okay, I see myself as I see us as one people who have been separated and given all these uh, um, labels, right? Which is intended to separate us. Okay, so back to what I was saying. So if your parents were born here, if you're a descendant of enslaved people, right? Generations and generations and generation afterwards, you have been affected. Even you yourself now, you have been affected. A lot of these dangerous chemicals, your parents, your uh, grandparents, their parents, their going all the way back, exposed to toxic chemicals, and we know that particularly if you have parents exposed to these toxic chemicals, they also um, pass on those negative effect of those chemicals onto their children. Okay, so again, right? But again, these are policies in terms of the creating of substandard housing to house black people, the passing of I shouldn't say passing, but the approval of chemicals and pesticide, right? In which the vast majority of you know um, farm hands were black people, particularly in the South, right? So if you read um, Rubenstein, I'm sorry, Richard Rothstein book, right, which is called The Color of Law, right? A forgotten history of how our government segregated America. Okay. Then you can also read. Let's go back to the beginning. I want to show you guys this. A terrible thing to waste: environmental racism and its assault on the American mind. Okay. So again, we particularly in this in the Richard Rothstein book, it talks about how you know this was government policies, right? Redlining, government policy. This all has a direct effect on us today, regardless of you see these black politicians. They don't want to address because again, they don't. They're not black first. They're not black first. They are multicultural first. Okay, everybody else, white people are white first, right? And multicultural is a word that they choose to use because they'll say, well, America is a multicultural country. Yes, it is, right? But let's look at policies and who benefit from those government policies the most, right? And let's also look at who uh, who these policies affect. That who these policies have the most detrimental effect on. So you're multicultural in the sense because you want every group and people to buy products uh, by created by white companies or sold by white companies, right? But you're not multicultural in the suburbs. You're not multicultural in the uh, upper corporate offices. You're not multicultural within the state and federal government, right? Because your multicultural is supposed to reflect a broad range of people. So again, we have to understand how to use these terms against us, and then we go around speaking these terms of as if it's like some, uh, something to be proud of, right? When a lot of these policies, okay, that has led to uh, the uh, the downgrading, I would say, of black intelligence, and yes, you have uh, black people who are extremely intelligent, all right, but are these people doing things to directly benefit black people, or are they doing things to benefit other groups besides their own? Okay, so to me, I don't, you have like these black intellects who, they love to throw their degree around, okay, because they feel like they have status and it makes them feel good, right? And I look at other groups. I look at the Asians. I look at white people. Their intellect. They don't throw their intellect around like, it's something like as if it's like they feel like they're chosen by God or something like that. They put their intellect to use, right? And they create tangible things. Okay. But again, I don't blame black people, particularly our intellects, to how they disregard um, their own people, because again, they have been conditioned, right? And I understand that. I understand because I truly understand that because I understand the psychological processes, the technology development in which uh, is meant to control us, which is meant to blind our true reality, right? And how we are given a false consciousness, as Dr. Amos Wilson said. Uh, the American Negro, as he said, have been given a false consciousness. And one of my favorite books is falsificate uh, the falsification of African consciousness. Right, one of the most I would say life changing uh, books that I have read. All right. So let's get back to the lead poisoning. Lead poisoning reveals environmental racism in the US. A recent study shows that being black is a bigger risk. And I want you to understand this because when you hear, these politicians says it ain't about black and white, you hear these, I don't want to say the the word, but I'll say Negropeans. But I will say the word sample, right? So a lot of these samples, you get them, they get on television and they say it's not about black and white and you know racism is dead and all this stuff, right? When every study that shows the detrimental effect on black people in this country, whether it be economics, whether it be health, whether it be um, you know childbirth, whether it be education, right, whether it be housing, everything, everything, right? And I do say everything that negatively affects us is because we are black. All right? Yes, because we are black. And like I said, you'll have those black people who are Negropean people who, you know, may be in the upper class, and then they want to act as if, they want to play colorblind, right? To white people who don't play colorblind to them. And this is, when you see Donald Trump when he was president, you start to see all these black people, particularly black women, right, who moved to these white suburbs or these white areas, right, crying on videos talking about, oh, I've lived here and such, and I've never experienced racism. No, you experience racism. You just refuse to look at it. You just refuse to see the truth. And actually, I shouldn't say refuse, but you've been conditioned to not see the truth. You've been conditioned to think that when you move into a white suburb, that somehow you've made it, right? That you're part of the American dream. But understand that, the vast majority of white people in those suburbs, they hate you and they hate your children. One of the worst things we as black people have done is that when we get money, we move into these suburbs with people living amongst people who don't want us there. And they are very good at hiding their true feelings until there's a leader that come about and you know is a no holds bar racist, and then you start to see the races within them, how it comes out, are the biggest within them, how it come out. And so you have all these black women, on social media crying. You know, the, I went into the store and this white man called me the N word. And they're like, I've never experienced this in my entire. Yes, you have. I can tell you, when I was younger, I experienced it in junior high school. I experienced it actually in elementary school, junior high school, college. And the reason why I say that is because uh, teaching you about your history, right? True history, and not just American history, because we know they lie about American history. We know that, and we also know they lie about world history. Right? That's racism. So for you to say that you've never experienced it because you move into a neighborhood and you've been blinded to the truth that you haven't experienced racism, it could be micro racism. You get into a position or you get into a job, predominantly white people. They'll test you. They'll test you to see, uh, how far they can take things, right? And a big part of them testing you is because again they know what they've done to us as a people. They know the environmental warfare they've done. They've known how you have white developers buying up toxic land, building houses, making it look pretty, shiny, and new. Okay, marketing it to specifically to black people, right? We buy those houses. 10 years, 20 years later, we're sick, dying of cancer, right? Can't understand why. Until someone says, you know what, let's go and research this land, you know, and then you find out that, yeah, they're building these houses on toxic lands, right? And then they purposely selling it to black people. It's intentional. And we have to always understand that. We have to always know this. So we cannot be taken by surprise anymore in the future. And then when we go to buy houses in certain environment neighborhoods, specifically if they are marketed towards us, that we have to do our due diligence to get environmentalists there to test the soil, you know, to make sure that the housing is to standard, right? The whatever the federal standard is in building a house or what have you, and it's up to code, right? But we have to make sure that the people doing that look like us, and hopefully, you know, they want what's best for us, right? To tell us the truth, okay? So you know, like I said, these things are purposely done, but you know, this is why again you see white people they love black people who like to say racism doesn't exist, you know, because in their mind they're saying, look at these fools, look at these fools. You know, these are the types of Negroes that we love. All right, the one that will accept what we've done to them, will not feel animosity towards us, will not hate us, even though we hate them. That's who they want. Okay, so a recent study shows that being black is a bigger risk factor for lead poisoning than poverty or poor housing. So your color is the biggest risk factor, right? That leads to poisoning or poverty or housing, right? Color blind health policies has ex- exasper- uh, exacerbated the environmental injustice, the authors say. Reports that the new corona, maybe I shouldn't even say that, but the new virus is disproportionately killing African Americans in the United States are no surprise in the country's public health to the country's public health researchers. Dozens of other healthcare threats, from polluted water in Flint, Michigan, to parasites in like hookworm in Alabama, have shown that African Americans are more exposed to environmental dangers and ill health than white Americans. But a study into one of the most enduring of these threats, lead poisoning among children, provides a new measure of what many say is the toxic effect of systemic racism in the US. There is no safety level of lead in the blood, which means even trace amount can damage brain cells, but it is particularly dangerous for children in their preschool years when it can disrupt brain development. Overall, the US Center for Disease Control, the CDC, estimate that around 2.5% of children between the age of 0 and 6 in the country have elevated blood levels. And again, when we read this, then we have to take it with a grain of salt, because we know that they will lie about the numbers, right, in order to uh, silence any anger or any sort of protest or any sort of realization that, you know, basically, like I said, they, you know, they're purposely uh, and they have purposely poisoned us, our parents, their parents, even today, even our kids today. All right, because when you look at uh, um, particularly in large cities where you have a public housing sector, right? They lie about inspecting apartments that have lead in it, lead paint, right? I talked about yesterday. What is it? A couple thousand houses that were, I mean, apartments that were said to have been inspected for lead and was signed off as being lead free, but they were not, right? Affecting the health of tens of thousands of people, from children to teenagers to adults. All right, and I talk about they will never show you the numbers of adults because they're not testing the adults. They're not testing the teenagers who live in those apartments for a decade and a half, right? They're not testing those teenagers. What they're doing, they're testing the younger children. Again, it's another way to lower the in the public's eye the severity of their attacks on us. Okay, so using public available data collected by the CDC from a representative sample of thousands of children age 1 to 5 uh, over an 11-year period. Again, you look at the age range. Okay, I talk about this, how they hide things in plain sight, how they omit things in plain sight. Okay, published in February by the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, found that black children living below the U.S. federal poverty level are 4 times as likely to have elevated levels of lead in their blood than poor whites or Hispanic children. The CDC does not offer a comment on the study on the grounds that it was not involved in writing it. The danger of being African American. Statistically, the increased risk of lead poisoning associated with being black persists even when you correct for all other factors, from poverty to education levels to the presence of smokers in the home to quality of housing. A lot of people have been saying, well, black children are more at risk because they're more likely to be poor, said study co-author who's it Denis uh, Dism Yetter, an independent academic and undergraduate nursing student in Kansas. Yeah, poverty's a problem, but it's nothing to compare to being a black child in America. Okay? Uh, Yeater was astounded by the result of their 3-year analysis. I knew it was bad, but I was expecting something like a marginal increase, something statistically significant, but not 2 to 6 times higher, they told DW. That is obscene. Right? So we see these things, and we read these things, you know, some of us experience these things ourselves, but where is the anger? Right? Where is the anger within us? Okay? Where is it? If this was being done to white people, you know, man, they you saw what happened in the January 6th terrorist attack, right? And that was just based on because of their feelings, right? Their delusional feeling of white people losing power. Okay? That's based off of that. Their delusional feelings. They did that. But we as a people, we're being poisoned, right? Our children's being poisoned. And going forward, their children will probably be poisoned also. But we don't have a collective outrage. We don't have a collective anger. The study includes some surprising conclusion. The social condition of being African American is a bigger risk than living in an old house. In other words, black children living in buildings built between 1950 and 1976 are 6 times more likely to have elevated levels of lead in their blood than white children living in a building of that era. So imagine your parents, your grandparents, okay? We're talking about generation after generation of black children, as well as black adults, poisoned with lead. Okay? And the reason why I bring up the book, The Color of Law, this is a book that we all should read. Because it talks about these things, right? The substandard housing, right? the creation of the in of public housing in areas and where specifically black people live, how they were built to be shabby, substandard, not taken care of. Okay, some of them built on toxic land, right? And then because again they're not being taken care of, and they'll blame the people. They'll say, it's the people there. Well, you know, again, then we turn around and we blame the very same people, right? And like I said, I've always, when I was younger, even in growing up in the '80s, you have to have like a lot of these kids were in special ed, right? And they came out of the public housing sector. But like I said, America has always have a way of deflecting responsibility, right, for what they have done, and putting it on the victims of their purposely intentful crimes, right, but committed against black people, right. So when we go around here and we look at each other and we say, well, everybody's responsible for their own action, and I always have to rebut that. So I always have to put a post or something, or and the truth, right? So example, particularly when it comes to relationship, many of us don't fully understand how if you are uh, if you were poisoned by that as a child, even as an adult, you know, you become very emotional because you don't have the cognitive capacity, not just because you don't have adults in the house that can show you how to handle emotions. Just like, and again, this is another war that they wage on black people in America, is the separation of families, right? The removal of fathers within the home, and I'm going to talk about that. But I understand that those there's a combination of things. Okay, so if you don't understand, right? If you don't, particularly, this is what we need to be teaching our young people, right? Particularly our high schoolers, uh, people in college, okay, black people in college, so that they have a full understanding of what was done and what is being done, right? And then they can make a conscious effort to think different. Even if the vast majority of them don't, but there will be enough of them to think different going forward, right? So they can have better outcomes, whether it be in their relationships, whether it be in their personal life, whether it be in educating themselves even more, right? But this is what America doesn't want. America doesn't want intelligent black people, right? They want to have a few that they can control, that they can put out in front of the television, and we can look at these and we can say, okay, well, yeah, the black people is doing so well in America. When we know that's not true, the vast majority of black people are not doing well. But besides what they push on social media, what the algorithms would push to you, trick you to make you believe something that's not true. Okay, this is why we have a lot of delusional uh, black people, a lot of black people in America that suffer from mental illness, right, including myself. Okay, I'm not going to leave myself out of this, because we all suffer from mental illness, whether we want to believe it or not. We all do. Okay, so um, where are we at here? So yeah, so we must understand this. We must understand that this is purposeful, this is intentful, this is how they get rid of the competition, right? This is how they incarcerate a lot of us. This is how they break up our families. This is how they intellectually dumb us down, right? This is how they take away our intelligence. This is one of the ways, I should say, right, of them doing these things. All right. That date is important. The US began putting restrictions on lead content of paint in 1977, but lead paint was never systematically removed from old buildings, and the US Department of Housing estimated that over 3.6 million housing children still contain lead hazards. So a couple of years ago in New York, there were like over I believe 11,000 children, predominantly black and brown children, but mostly black, was diagnosed with lead poisoning. And a lot of those kids come from the public housing sector, right? So you cannot tell me that they're not still using lead paint, okay? You because I mean, then if they're not using lead paint, then how often do they paint these apartments, right? See, these are things that we don't think about. These, like I said, you have to open up your awareness, right? You have to become more conscious. And I know because again, they hate conscious black people. We are made to look at as being the bad people because we love ourselves and we love our people and we want to expose uh, the truth about what's being done to us, right? But too many of us are so damn indoctrinated with religion that you know um, we tend to ignore a lot of these things, right? And then when we find out the truth, if we do accept it, we always say, well, if it's God's plan, like again, I just don't understand that, you know. Even though I do understand it, it's just to me it's shocking, and it angers me that we think this way, right? So it's so bad, Yada said. It deteriorates into little pieces of dust. You inhale it. Kids touch stuff, touch their mouths, absorb it. Before the 1950s, it used to be so bad that kids would go into seizures, go to the hospital and die because there was so much lead in their blood. All right. So again, here it goes. The consequences of redlining. Okay. Uh, the figure Yada unearthed aren't surprising to community workers in areas where lead poisoning is just one of the many health hazards that African Americans face. You have, you just have to look around you, said Kinzer Pointer, pastor and health campaigner in an overwhelmingly African American community in Buffalo. And by the way, Syracuse, New York, it is probably the uh, um, have the part of this country that has the most, particularly where black people live, where the vast majority of black people and black children are poisoned with lead. Okay, um, so where was I? All right, let me just read this over. So you just have a look around you, said Kenna Pointer, pastor and health campaigner in an overwhelmingly African American community in Buffalo, New York, a city where most of the housing is older than 1978, and 40% of children tested in 2006 had an elevated blood lead level. That's 40% of kids in Buffalo. Okay, and I talk about Syracuse too, right? Buffalo is a prime example of the effects of redlining, the inclusion of minorities in the U.S. from everything from insurance to grocery stores, which offer a clue to how racism leads to poor health. Pointer said that in the neighborhood he served, the nearest supermarket selling fresh fruit and vegetables is over 5 miles away, and 60% of people don't own their own transportation. People live on fast food, he says. There's a reason why there's a fast food I mean, here in Brooklyn, it's like there's fast foods all over the place, right? And most people who are, again, the working poor, right, or the working class blacks, they have no time to come home and cook. Why? Because we have a vast population of people who are single, right? If they're in a relationship, they're living separated. If they have children, the children are most likely to live with uh, the female, and because there's no father in the home, right? These kids, let's say if they are poisoned with lead, they have, and their mother don't want to even deal with them. It's like, hey, I got to work. On the weekend I want to go out and have some fun. You know, so they leave them by themselves or with other family members or with friends, right? And so we expose our kids to a lot of dangers, right? And because we've been conditioned with this individualistic mindset, and particularly with black women, black women, but European women, I don't need a man, and this and that, and it's like, and then we raise our kids in dysfunctional lifestyle that we give them as an example of how to live when you grow up, right? So we're continuously being affected, right, by this war against us, and we don't understand the effect it has on our psyche, our mindset, our relationship with each other, crime, right? And so, what do you do? What do you do? And for a person like me who's been through a lot, you know, and to, I'm taking this time because again, to do this stuff, like I said, I don't have a degree in environmentalism, psychology, all this stuff, but I know how important these things are to us as a people and as individuals. And I know that when I started to look at this stuff, to study this stuff, right? Even through my own childhood growing up here in America, right? That, you can reflect on certain things, right? And say, okay, yes, I've experienced that. Maybe this could be the reason why. Maybe that's the reason why. Maybe that's the reason why this individual is the way that he or she is, right? Because come on, we've all know people in our communities, right, who we know that their mind wasn't right, right? They may not be so called crazy, but we know that, just on their behavior patterns, right, that something wasn't right? And a big part of it is environmental poisoning. Another part of it is also the fact that when you have kids and you have kids raising other kids because you have to go to work. See, and that's the benefit of having two parents household, right? There's a lot of disadvantage that they don't tell us about being single and having, and particularly with children growing up in single parents household, right? Particularly if kids are being raised by their mothers, who is uh, who is the head of that household, or there's no man in the house. Okay, but they keep pushing on this dysfunctional lifestyle, and you get to a point now where we have accepted it, where we are now living in such a dysfunctional way that it has become a normal way of life for us. Okay, so uh, redlining also extends to mortgages and home ownership. The U.S. Census show that around only around 42% of African Americans own their home, compared to 68% of white Americans. All right, uh, Rawa, I even pronounce the last name. I'm going to even try. Director of People United for Sustainable Housing in Buffalo, explained that when renters receive a letter from health authorities warning their building is contaminated, the expectation is for them to either move or get their landlord to remedy the issue. Right? But again, these landlords, they know. The people that are owning these homes and buildings, they're not black people. And they're renting out. They're not black people, they are white people. And they know. They just like how they know in Florida what you had to stand your ground laws, which was also we come to find out that other states in the country had the stand your ground law. We didn't know about these things, right? Until they kill one of us or kill one of our kids, and then all of a sudden they say stand your ground, and all of a sudden that's it. They don't get charged, right? I mean, am I making this stuff up? I mean, think about it. Am I making this stuff up? Even though we know, even though you know, just think about it. Just take a minute, right? Just take a minute. Close your eyes and say to yourself, Is he making this stuff up? Do I see this all the time? Why is it that I don't get angry about this stuff? Because it affects me, it affects my family, it affects my friends, it affects my children. But we don't get angry. Okay, just do that. Okay, so confronting your landlord can be more fraught for Black people. In 2012, a study in the American Journal of Sociology showed that African Americans face disproportionately higher eviction rates than whites in the same income bracket, and moving voluntarily may mean breaking a lease or losing the deposit, making it still harder to afford a lead-free home. Wow. The colorblind failure. David Rosner, co-author of the 2014 book Lead Wars, which traced the post-war history of lead poisoning, said racism has always been part of why lead poisoning has been tolerated. So when you see these politicians get on television and they say, "Oh, this is a serious issue and we take these things seriously," no, they don't. Just Google nitre committing, um, what's the word? Uh, when you go to court and you take an oath and then you lie, understand, right? Nitro officials, they get in court, they take this stand, and they lie. And guess what? They're not thrown in jail. Nothing is done. But if you do that, right, you're getting charged with. Geez, I can't believe I was just reading something about it too. Um, well, you guys have to excuse me. You guys know what I'm talking about. Hopefully, you know what I'm talking about, right? Perjury, right? So they perjure themselves. Okay, they're not holding contempt of court. They're not charged with perjury. I want you to understand how this system works together, right? And this its intended purpose is to keep us down, to criminalize us, to poison us, to take away our intelligence, to take away the intelligence of our children. Because again, when it comes to competition, white people don't want to compete with black people, and they don't want black people competing with them. And if you somehow slip through the crack, right, they have to keep you close. So they will either use you for their own purpose. Because if you decide that you're going to use your intelligence or your talent, what have you, to benefit black people in a tangible way, believe me, that's not going to happen, right? Because again, you look at the history, we tend to be blinded by that, right? In American history, anytime you have black people come together to do something that's tangible, we've always been met with a white backlash. And that white backlash is in the form of violence. Okay? For example, many people don't think that the 2008 housing crisis, the one that caused the financial crash, was a war on black people, of taking away the the wealth gained by black people over the past uh, decade, right? A decade and a half. That was a way to steal black people's wealth, and in doing so, they caused a housing bubble crash that affected the entire economy, right? And because they know the government was going to bail them out, they said, "Hey, we're not worried about that. The government is going to bail us out." Okay, we see the same thing with the auto crisis. American automakers building substandard automobile. Do you think these people care? They don't even care about most white people. These corporations. Okay. Anyhow, so as he explained, after the war, the Lead Industry Association even tried to blame black parents. Listen to this now. This is not, again. I'm not when I talk about how in the '80s how they were blaming black parents for their children having ADHD or having learning disabilities, what have you. They were blaming their parents, saying, "Oh, because they was on drugs." Okay, that's why you have so many kids in special ed. All right. So the Lead Industry Association even tried to blame black parents for letting their children eat paint. One 1956 letter showed the LIA arguing to government that lead poisoning was a problem of educating the parents, but most of the cases are in Negro and Puerto Rican family. And how does one tackle that job? In their study, Yeda wants to show the hidden structural racism can be just as dangerous as the colorblind public health screening, only exacerbates the problem. Currently, blood level screening is recommended by organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics when children live in old buildings or belong to a certain economic class. Yeda says not addressing race too blinds authorities to the endemic discrimination. If you're ignoring black race as a leading risk factor, you're having so many black kids at far greater risk out of the local, state, and federal response, he added. To act like there is no policies behind people being at risk or what caused that or how to solve that, it's political. Okay? So I think that's the end of that article, right? So let's go on to the next because again, I want to show you guys. Again, here's federal housing policies leave poor kids at risk of lead poisoning. Yeah, here you have a single mother with all her kids, right? No father in the house, and again, I don't know her circumstance, right? But this is the vast majority of black mothers in America. Okay, when Lanice Walker moved in 2012 from public housing to a private rental in Chicago Austin neighborhood, she thought she finally had secured a safe, cozy place to live for her family to live. Not only did the Chicago Housing Authority provide a taxpayer subsidized voucher that paid most of Walker's rent, the agency sent an inspector to ensure the narrow frame house had adequate heat and plumbing, working smoke detectors, and no sign of lead paint hazard. Less than 5 months later, a nurse practitioner diagnosed her 4-year-old daughter with lead poisoning. Walker knew that exposing young children to crumbling lead paint can permanently damage their developing brain, and she called the CHA, I guess the Chicago Housing Authority, to ask for an emergency move from the home on Leamington Avenue. The CHA officials turned her down. The amount of lead in her daughter's bloodstream was 11 micrograms per uh, deciliter, more than 2 times higher than the standard for medical monitoring and home inspection set by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. But federal housing regulation don't require taxpayer subsidized landlord to take action to protect poisoned children unless the lead is at least 20. Wow. Okay, do you want me to read that again? But federal housing regulation don't require taxpayers subsidized landlord to take action to protect poisoned children unless the level is at 20. So why do we find, right, in whether it be public housing or private housing, in which the 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 people living in those housing or apartment rentals, what have you, predominantly black for the most part, where you have a huge number of lead poisoning in children. And again, we like to think that these things are not purposely done. Somehow, white people have tricked us into thinking, not tricked us, but they've conditioned us, and they did a damn good job, okay, of conditioning us to uh, somehow blame ourselves, to somehow accept what's being done, to somehow they're able to curve our emotions when it comes to our anger about these things to where we become emotionless people when it comes to things that have detrimental effect on us, unless they give us something to be angry about, unless they give us someone to be angry about, okay, or unless they give us a cause to be angry about. But when it comes to our own children and ourselves being poisoned with lead, we don't display any anger at all. Okay, uh, they treat me like I was nothing, like my daughter didn't matter, because to them your daughter didn't matter, and you didn't matter. Walker said recently. If she still, and, let me just say this also. About probably about a month or two ago, here in New York, you had I was watching was a video on NYCHA, right, which is the New York housing, New York City Housing Authority, and they had black women, right, living in apartments with no doors. They were literally using cardboard as to create a makeshift door. Okay, and they would cut out a they had a cutout of the cardboard door, covered with like tape, like painter's tape, and they had to look through this. I mean, it's just like wow, and I'm just like wow. We had elderly black women, right? Ceilings all coming down, open ceilings, in the horrible condition. And the people that run Nitro, they literally believe that it's totally acceptable, right, for black women. Again, that's the majority of Nitro applicants, particularly in areas where black people live, right? But then you compare that to areas where you had, in areas where predominantly white people live in public housing, you don't see that. You don't see those things on the news. You don't. And anybody that can show me that, please show me it. Please send me an article, send me a video to let me know. And again, don't just send me one, send me a whole bunch. Because I can show you a whole bunch of videos, right? In which you see predominantly black women, whether they're elderly or they're younger with kids, living in a deplorable condition, right? In some of these public housing sector, in the public housing sector. Okay? So if she still wanted to move, the CHA told her she would risk losing her rent voucher to someone on a long waiting list for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, commonly known as Section 8. Medical records provided by Walker shows that within the next year, while still living in the Austin rental, another daughter and one of her sons was were diagnosed with lead poisoning at levels that were higher than the CDC standard but below the environmental intervention limits set by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and followed by the CHA. Now, why is there such a difference in terms of acceptable? And there should be no level of that is acceptable, particularly when it comes to dealing with children. But again, because they know exactly what it is that they're doing. So this woman has to be she's going to be in that same apartment, unable to move. Because if she does, they'll give her, you know, Section 8 to somebody else. Okay? So they put her in a position where whatever decision she makes, right, is going to do harm to her and her children. Okay? The daughter levels was 15 and son 10. All 9 of her children eventually were found to have elevated lead level. Remember, I'm trying not to curse. All of her kids, all of them. And you have people who, particularly, the Sambos, right, who would say that black people, those people in America, shouldn't get reparation. Okay? But when they talk about these things, they never bring up things like this. They will talk about the slavery in the past, the slavery, what have you, and how it in terms of economics. But they don't talk about the health toll, the millions of black people who've died because the US government, this racist government, and I don't care what they say, even today, it is still as racist as it was in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Because even today, we still have a situation like this, where hundreds of thousands, even millions of young children and adults being poisoned with lead. Her ordeal highlights a hidden problem facing Chicago families seeking a better life through federal subsidized housing. Since 2012, at least 178 other children in Section 8 homes and apartments have fallen into the same gap Walker children did, according to city records obtained by the Tribune. So imagine also you have other parents, right, who were younger, affected by lead, their children affected by lead. They don't say anything, you know. I mean, we know that uh, a lot of kids, right, don't see their pediatrician, regularly. We know that. We know that, particularly when you have a working parent who's working to, put a roof over your head, that is a lot of stuff that they ignore. And again, I don't fault them. It's the situation that we as black people in America have been put in. We didn't do this to ourselves, despite what people would think. And it always angers me when I hear people say, why are black people, why this and that? If you educate yourself, you'll know why. And I always say, when it comes to dealing with our people, each and every one of us, we should have an understanding mind and a sympathetic heart. And I always say that because when you educate yourself on these issues, you know, you can't get upset. You can't get upset at our people. You can get upset at the government, which you should. You should get upset at this white supremacist system, which we should. But we don't get upset about with the white supremacist system. We don't get upset with white people who continue to do this to us. We get upset with each other, right? And a lot of us will use this, particularly our women, against us men, will use this same white supremacist system to exert some sort of revenge or what have you on black men. And again, which is a sad state. We never seem to think about these things, how it affects the way we think, the way we behave, right? And again, this is just one of many things in this, one of many weapons, I should say, that white supremacists and white racists and white racism has engaged on us. And and like I said, I keep saying, it's a war against us, and we need to understand that it's a war against us, right? And then they get us to be at war with each other while ignoring the truth. All right, so you're right that these standards should all match, not only here but nationally, said Katie Logren, acting chief of the CHA voucher program. On its website, HUD declares that Section 8 families have a right to live in housing that is safe and sanitary. But, again, they'll always put these things in there, right? But the reality is that a lot of our people don't, who are on, in public housing or in these private rental buildings are not, we're not safe. And when it comes to accountability, the U.S. government is not taking accountability. The landlords is not taking accountability, right? The city housing authorities are not taking accountability, right? Are they taking accountability? All right. Local housing agencies are required to inspect properties before families move in and at least once a year after that. All right. So let's move on to the next. Got a few minutes left. Um, Again, another level. And here you see a picture of because even in poor white neighborhoods, you'll still find white people and their kids with lead poisoning. But the vast majority of lead poisoning affect black people, and it's intended that way. Some white people are going to fall through the cracks, right? And again, remember, in the eyes of these, I call them the dark tribe personalities, right? These racists, right? That an acceptable amount of casualties within their own group is acceptable. Okay, and a lot of times they do this because again they try to not make it seem like if that is not just black people. No, it's not just black people, but the vast majority who has been poisoned in America are black people. Okay, and this is in Missouri, right? Now, the thousands of U.S. locals where lead poisoning is worse than Flint. Reuters examination of lead testing result across the country found almost 3,000 areas with poisoning rates far higher than in the tainted Michigan City. Yet many of these lead hotspots are receiving little attention or funding. St. Joseph, Missouri, on a sunny November afternoon in this historic city, birthplace of the Pony Express and dead spot of Jesse James, um, Loranda Mitteray watched her son, kidding to dig in their front yard. As he played, she scolded him to put his finger for putting his finger in his mouth. The explanation, she pointed, was the peeling paint in her old house. Kadeen, she said, had been diagnosed with lead poisoning. Right? He has lost. He has lots of company within 15 blocks of his house. At least 120 small children were diagnosed have been poisoned since 2010, making the neighborhood among the most toxic in Missouri. Reuters found as part of an analysis of childhood lead testing results across the country. In St. Joseph, even a local pediatrician, children were poisoned. So even local pediatrician, their children were poisoned. Last year, the city of Flint, Michigan burst into the spotlight after its children were exposed. And again, they keep saying after its children. But what happened to the adults? What happened to the adults? What happened to the teenagers? Right? What happened to what happened to the uh, um, 8-year old to 12-year olds? What happened to those? Okay. Uh, in the year after Flint switched to corrosive river water that leached lead from all pipes, 5% of the children screened had high blood levels. Flint is no aberration. In fact, it doesn't even rank among the most dangerous lead spots in America. In all, Ruthers found nearly 3,000 areas which recently recorded lead poisoning rates at least double those of Flint during the peak of that city's contamination crisis. And more than 1,100 of these communities had a rate of elevated blood tests at least 4 times higher. The poison place on this map stretched from Warren, Pennsylvania, a town in the Allegheny River, where 36% of children that high had high lead levels, to a zip code in Goat Island, Texas, where a quarter of tests showed poisoning in some pockets of Baltimore. As a matter of fact, this article, let's see how old this article is, because there was a recent update. This was 2016. There's a recent update that talks about all, I believe it was 40 something thousand children in Baltimore had lead poisoning. So it shows you this stuff still goes on today. And again, just to show you guys, I'm not just talking about this stuff. It's not my opinion, right? I am going to actually show you guys that article, right? Now, I didn't think about putting up that article, but now that I um, thought about it, I will bring that article up just so you guys know that I'm not. This is recently, okay? All right, let's all right, let's do this. guys entertained. Okay. All right. So, all right. So I couldn't really find the article. I didn't want to keep you guys waiting too long, but this is from 2020, right? And it says the state poisoning in um, Maryland children has reached a historic low. This is what the article says, right? Now I'm not going to read all this stuff, but I'm just going to scroll down here. Okay, understand this, all right? And again, how they try to soften uh, the truth, how they try to say, well, it's not that many kids, right? Because remember, this it has reached a historic low. Okay, now I want you to understand how they use words in terms of doublespeak. And what doublespeak is that they will give you the truth, but then they will uh, give other things that will somehow negate the truth, but you wouldn't become emotional, angry, right? And so let's talk about this. Of the 132,224 Maryland children aged 6 and younger, and again, they're always going to give you kids that are under 6 or under 7. Again, right? But you got to think. You got to use your mind and think. Well, do these kids have older siblings? Do they have one older siblings, two, three, four, whatever, 5 older siblings? Right? They're not testing those older siblings, right? Oh, I mean, come on. Okay. So, a child at age 6 and younger tested last year. A little over 2% show sign of elevated levels of 10 micrograms of lead per deciliter of blood. And again, even 10 micrograms of lead, right, is enough to affect a child cognitive ability, even as 1%. Okay? So what they do is, again, they play with the numbers, they lied, right? And now here we go again. And I talk about doublespeak. Children tested in Baltimore City accounted for 35% of kids 6 and under statewide with lead levels 10 micrograms per deciliter or higher. Do you guys see what they did here? Do you guys see what they did here? So they give you the number of children who showed sign of elevated lead levels of 10 micrograms of lead per deciliter of blood. This is the lowest documented level of lead poisoning in this group since this age group since the state began uh, aggregating such data over 25 years ago. This group is at the highest risk of lead poisoning. Well, how is that group is the highest at the lead poisoning when you have then you're saying here, right, that 35% of kids 6 and under statewide, right? So it's Baltimore, then you have statewide, okay? Um, where you have a higher lead levels of 10 micrograms per deciliter or higher. That's 35% of all kids. That is huge. And like I said, and the number is probably real. The number I know is higher because again, they're only testing kids 6 and under. They're not testing kids 7 years old, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way up to their teenage years. And then what about the adults, right? So a person born 25 years ago in Baltimore, in Maryland, statewide, wherever, right, may have been poisoned with lead. So just think for a minute how many people that is. Okay? I mean, I hope I'm making sense. You know, the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention deemed 5 micrograms of lead per deciliter as reference value that demonstrate elevated lead levels in children. So again, what happened to the kids that tested for 5 micrograms per lead per deciliter? See, what they do is that they don't give you the full numbers. They choose a particular age range and they give you that, and that's all they give you. And they say, hey, you know what? That's not that bad. But it is. You know, it is. Whether it be one child, uh, 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 100 child, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million, that's bad. Okay? So again, I just like to, just to let you guys see. I'm not talking this stuff because it's my opinion or based on some speculation I may have. But no, they're telling you. We have been conditioned to not be angry about this stuff. We have been conditioned to whenever white people do horrible things to us, we've been conditioned to march, forgive them because in the name of Jesus, you know, um, to accept it, right? To not be angry. But yet, if a black person does something to you, you're ready to take their head off. You are ready to use the same system, right? To set that system against one of your own. Okay? And that person may not have done even a tenth of what white people have done to you. Again, understand how they control our anger through our conditioning, how they control us, how they make us, ignore our reality, our true reality. Right? It is the falsification of our consciousness. They're the one that gave us our consciousness. And if we're to take back our consciousness, you have to educate yourself on the truth. You have to look at the reality for what it is. You have to love yourself and then love your people. That when you look at any black man, black woman, black child, right, that you see yourself in them. That love you have for yourself, you also have for them. Okay? And you have to come to that understanding that here in America, particularly not just in America, but all over the diaspora, that we are, and people like to say, oh, you don't have the victim mentality, what have you, but we are victims of white racism and the violence, and we are the victim of violence by white racism. Okay, so you know, when they talk about reparation, this is why we're so divided, and they deliberately divide us for this particular reason, so that we won't unite. And when it comes to us seeking reparations, or aid us, Americans seeking reparations, they get other black people to say, or other Negropean people who may be immigrants, or you know and again, this is another thing I'm going to talk about, is the deliberate effort to create so-called model black people, particularly here in America, to turn them against uh, black people born in America, and to create animosity within uh, African American descendants of the enslaved against other black people that come from other countries. Okay, we have to understand the game that's being played, and that's why I said we cannot let uh, uh, regions separate us from being black people. We have to be black people first. Doesn't matter, as Peter Tosh said, no matter where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're a black woman, you're an African, right? So you see yourself as a black person of African descent, right? Matter of fact, as an African, so it doesn't matter. We have to start to think like this. This is how Europeans think, even if they fight against each other. But let's sure come together to keep you and I down. Okay, just remember that. All right. Ooh, kind of run over my time. Um, okay, so let me just do this. I want to read. That's what you hear. Here we go. Let's go to the chapters. Um, again. So in chapter 2 of the book, A Terrible Thing to Waste. All right. The lead age, heavy metal, low IQs. If you are going to put something in a population to keep them down for generations to come, it would be lead. Detroit pediatrician Mona Hannah Artista. Okay, that's all I want to read. I'm not going to read anything else, but I want you guys to keep saying this in your mind over and over again. Okay, if you are going to put something in a pollution, in a population, not pollution. If you are going to put something in a population to keep them down for generations to come, it would be lead. Okay, and on that note, I will say, see you guys on the next video.